Alright guys, now we're looking at key issue 2 of chapter 4, folk material culture. Okay, so this is going to be things like clothing. Okay, we've got our folk clothing. You see things like the Dutch wooden shoes or traditional clothes, whether you're looking at Muslims or Jews. It's things like this. Okay, these are the traditional things, the folk things, the things that aren't seen necessarily all over the world. Okay, something that could be the polar opposite of that is something like jeans. Okay, now people are obviously going to use stimulus diffusion, where it's like contagious diffusion, where everybody's wearing jeans, except they're going to change something about those jeans. Okay, so like people in South Korea bleach like just the butt of the jeans, so that they've got like a white butt on their jeans, and then everything else is normal. Or your moms might have bedazzled their jeans in the 1980s or whatever. Like that's a thing that exists. Okay, so now we look at so food taboos. These are super interesting. Okay, food taboos are basically things that exist where people refuse to eat a certain food. Okay, so for you guys, that might be dog, or cat. But for other people, it's things like beef or things like pork. Okay, and for a lot of people, they have a better reason than, well, I own a dog. Okay, a lot of people, it's based on their religion or it's based on another part of their culture. Okay, but the thing that you have to remember is that these cultures are predicated off of what was the easiest for the people at the time. Okay, so the reason a lot of people or a lot of cultural groups aren't allowed to eat pork is because pigs would have to eat the same things that humans would eat and not really give as much meat and reward for that. Okay, so it was an inconvenience to have pork. So just as much as it was like, religiously bad, it was also just an overall inconvenience to eat pork because it would spoil super quick and just generally hard to do when you were a desert dwelling people. But another thing that exists, like if we're talking about things that are hard for food, is things that are good for food. All right, and so one of those things would be like terroirs. Okay, terroirs are basically like things that change the kind of food that you can make or the flavor of the food that you can make. Okay, and you see this a lot specifically with wine production, and the things that are going to be important there are like your climate, your topography, your soil, etc. And so those are all hugely important. But again, you're going to see less alcohol production in places where the culture isn't going to allow for alcohol. Okay, so like if you were to see a question on a test that was like, okay, here is a map of the United States, which of these states is the least likely to consume alcohol, then you could probably safely guess Utah. All right, and we're going to go into religion in the next chapter, but the reason that it would be Utah is because of Mormonism, and that is one of the dominant religions in Utah, and therefore, because Mormons aren't really supposed to drink, they're less likely to drink in Utah because a majority of them are Muslim. Okay, are Mormon. I apologize. So another thing that you'll see is differences in like things that they're interested in. Okay, and so if you look right here, this map is really interesting because it looks at the percent of the market share held by the leading soft drink. So whether that's Coke or Pepsi, and so you see the United States is pretty dominated by Coke, but Russia is even more dominated by Coke. And there's an interesting anecdote that goes along with this, and that is Coke always sort of seemed to represent the United States and represent democracy. And so during the Cold War, for that like 50 years, Russia did not have Coca-Cola. They only had Pepsi. And so as soon as the Cold War ended and Russia started to import Coca-Cola, all their people were freaking done with Pepsi. And so they started drinking Coke instead. But I mean, you see, like there's people have different flavor palettes all over the world. Okay, then just in the United States, you can look at fast food preferences. Okay, you can look at all sorts of things and see interesting little trends. Okay, the other thing that this chapter talks about is housing. Okay, and just like I said with food taboos, with folk culture, a lot of this just comes down to what is available and what's not. Okay, the wood houses, brick houses, your all of these kinds of houses, etc. Okay, these houses exist because it's what was available to them. Okay, if you live in a place where there's no wood, then you have to learn how to make it out of bricks. Okay, and so that's sort of the situation you're in. You don't have access to all this popular housing, etc. Okay, so that's what you're going to see when we flip to the next page is all of these kinds of U.S. housing. Okay, predominantly the popular housing, and we're going to do an activity in class with that. But if you look right here, these are the various kinds of houses that have been popular since 1945 and up until the last couple of years. Okay, the last thing that we're looking at here is sacred spaces and houses, and this is, some of you may have these in your home, some of you might not. Okay, but there's a lot of houses that are set up with a lot more thought put into where everything is set up, rather than just like, oh yeah, I like that the couch is right here where I can see the TV. Okay, and we're going to talk about what sacred spaces look like and all that good stuff. All right. So if you guys just take a look at these different kinds of housing and where they come from, I know that it's tough and I know that it's kind of annoying, but there hasn't been a question on the test about this in a couple years, and so due to that, I would imagine we're probably due for one. So you guys need to know the differences in the houses. You need to know the differences in their names. I'll try to put a question on the quiz about it so that I can reward you guys for actually learning the difference in these. But it's something that you guys need to know. So definitely know the different kinds of houses in the United States. Definitely know what sacred spaces are. Definitely know about wine production and terroirs. And then food taboos. And then finally, the difference between folk and popular clothing and all that good stuff. Okay, so if you guys have that, then you are all good.